So Carmen weighed in with hurt. Healing, a negative experience that leaves an impact on a person. Thank you for that. An event or experience that creates struggle, pain, and long-lasting effects. Yeah, continue to reflect on that and weigh in with your definitions. There's a definition that I really like, developed through the Crisis Prevention Institute, and it says trauma is defined as an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening and has lasting adverse effects. Exactly, an event or experience that's out of your control, something that's with us for the rest of our lives, right? So trauma is anything that results from experiences that overwhelm our ability to cope, right? And this is a really simplified definition. It's more than just an event, it's an experience that has an effect on mind and body. You know, the biological reactions that occur can happen immediately, or they can be delayed. And then the duration of those experiences can be short-term or long-term. And, you know, one way to describe it is that, you know, trauma is what happens in our body because of what has happened to us, right? So that's a way of kind of thinking about it. If I had a show of hands, most of you are familiar or have heard of ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences. And the one thing that, two things I like to highlight. One, if you have not watched Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris's TED Talk on ACEs, make a note to yourself. It is 16 minutes of your life that I think everybody should watch that TED Talk to really get an understanding of this and connect the dots. And the other is just to really understand that this is really profound research. And I want you to understand who this research was built on, right? So this is that 1998 study with CDC and with Kaiser. They identified these 10 categories of adversities that people have experienced by the age of 18. And they found that as ACE scores increase, so does the risk of disease, social and emotional problems. There's really profound research in terms, like, for example, with an ACE score of 4 or more, you know, attempted suicide increases by 1,220%. So again, really profound. But the thing to note is that the study's participants were 17,500, which that's a huge group of people, right, to do a survey of it. 17,500, mostly white, middle and upper middle class, college-educated people from San Diego with good jobs and healthcare at Kaiser. And so knowing how profound this research is and what the impacts have been identified in that population, how much more so with our colleagues and with the students and those in our community who have so many other levels of complex trauma and adversity placed upon them. So just kind of a point to make here. So what counts as trauma? Well, there's several types of trauma, right, that we can identify. So acute trauma refers to a one-time event, such as an earthquake, fire, assault, an accident. Chronic trauma, that could be experiences that are repeated and prolonged. So like exposure to family violence or community violence, or a long-term medical issue, for example. Complex trauma, so this is going to be exposure to multiple traumatic events from an early age within that caregiving system. So that's going to be kind of what your ACEs look like. And then historical trauma, which refers to collective trauma experienced across groups, across generations, still feeling the effects. And that would include discrimination, oppression of particular groups. Racial and ethnic trauma. These are experiences that are racially driven, systemic oppression, discrimination, and that can look like anything from microaggressions to hate speech or really overt violence. And then minority stress. This is similar to racial ethnic trauma, and that involves chronic levels of stress faced by members of stigmatized groups. And so an example would be the experiences that a member of the LGBTQ+ community has in terms of discrimination or violence regarding sexual orientation or identity or expression. So knowing this really broad net that we have to cast and to define trauma, what we know is that if we use a universal precautions approach to trauma, right? Universal precautions, that is, we treat everyone through this trauma-informed lens, including yourself and your colleagues, Everyone will reap the benefits. Because oftentimes the conversations will center on us supporting those we serve. They center on us serving clients and their families, students and their parents, right? And we have a great deal of grace for those that we serve. Do we have that amount of grace for the person next to us who we constantly walk past and they never make eye contact with us and they never say hello and it's just kind of miserable to work with them? Are we that person sometimes? Do we have grace for ourselves when we fall short? Right? And that really is that shift, that taking up the understanding of trauma to another level where we start to function in ways that are productive. Everyone will reap the benefits. So knowing trauma is widespread, knowing that it's broadly defined, what are some of those responses to those exposures? It can be anything from hypervigilance, from kind of an inability to relax, to diminished creativity, right? To like really kind of a brain fatigue, not being able to really focus your attention in certain areas, chronic exhaustion, illness, self-esteem issues, a sense one can never do enough, fear, dissociation, really, anger, cynicism, aggression, addictions, guilt, shame, you know, all these things that are not us functioning at our best selves, or not the students that we work with functioning in their best self, right? So let's just do a quick little exercise here. Many of you may be familiar with this. And I will say also, some of you might use a similar technique in your classrooms or in your personal practice. So if you have a variation of this technique, I would love for you to share it with the group today, because I think it's really helpful to have some transferable experience. So this technique will just take you through your 5 senses to remind you of the present. This is another calming technique. It can help you get through tough or stressful situations, just help you focus your attention just for a moment, right? So you go ahead and take a deep belly breath to begin. Just take a deep breath. And as you start to relax, just look around for 5 things that you can see, just items you can see, and say them out loud or think of them. For example, you could say computer, cup, phone, pen. Now pay attention to your body right where it is and think of 4 things that you can feel. Anything that is actually touching your body now, or something that you can actually reach out and touch. So for example, you can feel your feet warm in your shoes, maybe the hair on the back of your neck, the chair under your bottom, whatever your hand may be holding. And then we're going to listen, and I'm going to be really quiet for a moment, and it's going to be astonishing how many sounds we are glossing over right now, right? So 3, listen for 3 sounds, 3 distinct sounds. And then smell. Acknowledge 2 things you can smell around you, either something you can actually smell, or just think of a couple of your favorite scents. And finally, acknowledge 1 thing you can taste. So it could be toothpaste, mint, coffee. If you can't taste anything, then just think of your favorite taste. And take another deep breath to end. So just a quick reflection on that. If anybody has used a similar technique, please raise your hand and share. I think that, you know, those are great examples. And again, this is just to really activate and to gain some mindfulness, gain some presence. This is especially helpful, you know, if somebody is feeling anxious, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, just to take a moment, sit there, and you're actually really activating all of your senses. So as part of our goals, we said we would define what is trauma-informed care. So we have this definition, we understand what it can be. And trauma-informed care, this is just a framework of thinking, right? It's a framework of thinking and interventions that are directed by an understanding of the profound neurological, biological, psychological, and social effects trauma has on an individual. Recognizing that person's constant interdependent needs for safety, connections, and ways to manage emotions and impulses. It's important also to understand what triggers are, right? Triggers are signals that suggest possible danger based on previous experiences, and this emotional, psychological, and behavioral responses that arise in response to that. One example that I like to give is that, you know, we, again, universal precautions approach, we don't know who has experienced trauma and what type of traumas they've experienced. Oftentimes we don't pay a lot of attention to our proximity. And if you're a teacher, you walk through the classroom. I teach on the side, and I'm a pacer. I'm walking all over the place. I put in 5 miles if I teach an 8-hour-a-day over at the academy. And you know, and this is exactly what I talk about. We come and we stand behind people. We stand beside people who are sitting, where there's a positional difference there, right? And oftentimes we don't recognize that could really be eliciting an uncomfortable response in somebody. So a trauma-informed framework, right? Trauma-informed care would be being aware of that and kind of being aware of who can see you, where they can see you. And let me give you another example. You know, I do similar training for people in law enforcement. And one question that I'll ask is, when you go into a restaurant and you sit down, where do you sit? Because their response is oftentimes different than others, right? They're going to sit in a position where they can see the door. They're going to sit in a position where they are scanning the environment the entire time that they're there. Truly, they're looking at maybe tattoos. They're looking at what somebody's wearing, the colors that they're wearing. They're really scanning the environment in a different way. And so when you think about trauma-informed care, right, that would be perhaps that person that might have trauma, might need a place to sit where they can see the door, where their back's not to the door. It's simple things like that sometimes people can't communicate so much verbally as they do with their behaviors. So be curious about why behaviors kind of come up, again, for the kids we work with, for our peers, and then also in ourselves, right? So trauma-informed care, what does this include? Well, this foundational piece is safe, calm, and secure environments with supportive care. Having a system-wide understanding of trauma prevalence, impact, and trauma-informed care. Cultural competence and humility, right? Recognizing our personal positioning. Supporting consumer voice, choice, and self-advocacy, right? So allowing people to have choices and options. And then a recovery, consumer-driven, trauma-specific service and supports, supported by healing, hopeful, honest, and trusting relationships. Really holding the space for others when oftentimes, you know, they may not have beliefs in themselves. Another part of trauma-informed care includes adopting trauma-sensitive language and thoughts, right? Our thoughts oftentimes come out in our speech, they come out in our behaviors. So really examining that. Trauma-sensitive language and thoughts reduce stigma, they reduce bias and perception, and this would look like person-first language. So an example would be a person experiencing poverty, not a poor person, right? Identify preferred words, avoid words that are triggering. Use preferred pronouns, create safety, avoid labeling, and just think about this difference in terms of somebody being non-compliant versus are they doing the best that they can, right? So kind of making that shift. This helps us improve how we interact with those we serve. And it really includes paying attention to language and to just every interaction. So why does this matter? What are the benefits to you? Well, the benefits of adopting a trauma-informed approach include rates of childhood trauma are high, and that impact on learning and behavior can be significant, right? If it feels like we're spinning our wheels and we're not getting anywhere, there's barriers, right? There's barriers. You can provide your best work, and there can be barriers that a trauma-informed approach could help you navigate. Schools can protect children from the negative effects of trauma and prevent future challenges. You know, when you think about so many people, you know, who are the people in your life that were your mentors, or, you know, that you identify as the most important people in your life? Oftentimes it's somebody from schools. It's a teacher, right? It could be parents, it could be mentors, you know, it could be coaches, pastors, it could be a probation officer. But almost always there's a teacher in that list, right? And so just knowing how profound your presence is, working with youth, really kind of shapes their experience and the way that they process trauma. So addressing trauma has a positive impact on students, schools, and the community. So what can we do? I present to you the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. So we can realize that this widespread impact of trauma exists, and we can realize that through education, through training, and then acceptance, really acknowledging that it is widespread, right? We can learn to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in others and in ourselves, and understand how these pieces are interconnected. One thing I like to talk about is this integrated experience that we have, where the behaviors and attitudes that you present impact the behaviors and attitudes that I present, and vice versa, right? And so if you figure we're all little bumper cars, and we're just kind of going about our business and we bump into each other, depending on how well we've managed our own stressors, things kind of like fall out of our little bumper car bowls into the other person's, right? And so managing ourselves and managing our own stress level is going to prevent us from saying things and doing things that we may later regret. So really recognizing how these things are interconnected. We can respond by applying what we learn in every interaction possible. That's a heavy ask, right? So we're going to give ourselves and others grace when we fall short of applying this knowledge. I provide this training, and I'm telling you, this training is my opportunity to be mindful during days of chaos, right? And so practicing what we preach is always a challenge. So just recognizing it's okay. It's just where we're at, right? And then we can reduce or resist re-traumatization of children, as well as the adults who care for them. Arguably, nearly all adults are in some position to impact the lives of children and each other. So, the opportunity to practice these 4 R's is constant. Has anybody been introduced to this concept of the resilient zone or received training through CPI? Okay, so the Trauma Resiliency Institute is a trauma-informed model of care. It really talks about how I don't need to talk about all my trauma in order to effectively process, right? In order to effectively cope, in order to effectively regulate. And more than anything, one important aspect of trauma-informed care is just to remember the concept that resiliency is there, right? People do bounce back, and to understand kind of like, well, how do those play into each other? You may have, 2 students in front of you who experience the same event, and one is completely dysregulated while the other is completely calm, right? In your own personal life, you may have experienced some traumas yourself, and others have experienced traumas, and some people respond differently. What is that? What is that about? No matter the type or severity of trauma, individuals can and do recover from it. Holding a strengths-based perspective and really being person-centered in our practice, those are the best ways we can help people build resilience, and know that the support of caring adults is one of the most single important things that help foster and build resilience. So what this resilient zone is, to simplify it, it's a comfort zone, right? The resilient zone is having the best capacity for flexibility and adaptability. It's this place where I have prosocial behavior, I'm thinking clearly, I am responsive rather than reactive, right? And it's possible, we're going to teach you a few things today, it's possible to remain in or to return to this resiliency zone. So I'm going to show you a graphic here that's kind of a build out of this. So we can get stuck in the low zone, we can feel depressed and isolated, exhausted. We can get stuck in that high zone and feel edgy, irritable, anxious, have anger outbursts, right? If you were in a place where you were stuck in a high zone or stuck in a low zone, you were bounced out of what is your resiliency zone. Now, illustrating that piece that, well, why do some people fare better than others? When you're in it and you can't really see that light at the end, it's really hard to imagine things being better. But once you get through it, you think about all the things that you have gotten through in your life. And there were times where it was like, how am I going to get through this? How can I deal with this loss, with this grief? And you did. and here you are, and your resiliency zone grew, right? And that is what resilience is about. And that is the important thing to know. How can I get back to this place of being able to cope really well? So knowing that this range of resilience here, and these slides that have a lot of information, again, don't worry, you'll get these, you can look through them again. But that optimal arousal zone, this is where learning, change, and growth happens. This is where we want our students to be. This is where we need to be, and this is where we want our peers to be, is in that range of resilience, right? And oftentimes we are focused on whatever activity is at hand, and it might be easy to dismiss when somebody's kind of on that brink of disengagement or on that brink of, anxiety or challenge to focus. This is a time to not be focused on task, but to resort back to regulation, to return to that range of resilience so that our time can be productive, so that our efforts can be productive, right? This helps us handle life stressors. So what is mindfulness? Some of you might have a mindfulness practice, and if you do, I would love for you to weigh in on the chat. And for some of you, this concept of mindfulness might be new, and for some of you, it might just be a buzzword you've heard in passing, right? If anyone has an opportunity, I highly recommend the mindfulness-based stress reduction class. It's a health ed class that Kaiser puts on. If you're a Kaiser member, it might be free. Otherwise, you can go at a rate if you're just a community member. And it really takes you through a lot of this understanding of mindfulness is just the ability to know what's happening in your body right here, right now, this very moment. So that was a 3-second pause that felt like an eternity. Just a 3-second pause, right? And so if we took 5 minutes, if we just took 5 minutes, if I had extra time today, we would be taking time to actually work through a body scan. We would be taking time to work through some mindfulness activities. Just that concept of that down regulation, that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that's a mindfulness strategy, right? So it's stepping back and observing those experiences from a little bit of a distance, right? So I can sit here and I can be trying to practice mindfulness and thoughts come in. I don't need to get mad at the thoughts. They're not in my way. They're just there. Notice them, let them go. I'll get to that later, right? And so really, I will tell you that I took the mindfulness-based stress reduction class, and it was profound for my own personal and professional growth. So it looks like there's some great meditations kind of coming in here. That's fabulous. We would talk about breathing. We could do some visualization, but oftentimes it's really just focusing on being still, even just for a moment. So after introducing you to mindfulness, I want to introduce you to resourcing and to just point out that the power of memory and the mind-body connection is so profound. Just picture this. It's a summer day and we're going for a walk, and we find this lemon tree, and it's not the little same sized 70-cent lemons that you find in the store. It's like all the weird size, big, bulky, kind of disfigured, dark yellow, light yellow. And so we pull down some lemons and we're going to go ahead and cut it in half. We're going to open it up and we're going to look at that and just see that shaped pattern, like all the veins running through it. And I'm going to cut us each a little wedge. All right. And you've got that big, thick rind all the way around it, that pale yellow flesh. And then we're just going to give it a tiny bit of a squeeze and then hold it up to our nose to give it a big, deep smell. Right. So I'm going to smell it. I'm just thinking about this. Smell, smell, smell. And then I'm going to put it against my lips, this little lemon wedge. I'm going to put it against my lip. I'm not going to bite into it yet. I'm just kind of smelling it, letting the juice just rest on my lip. Then I'm going to open my mouth, put it in my mouth, and bite down and start to chew on that lemony flesh, right? And so just walking through that, did anybody start to increase salivate? So it's kind of this weird thing. I didn't touch you, there were no lemons, but just by the power of memory, we actually can go ahead and have a physiological response that's beyond our control, right? So resourcing can have that similar positive effect. So a resource is something that brings you joy, comfort, and peace. It means using the positive things in your life, positive memories you've had, to bring a balance to your nervous system. And when we do that, we want to track these resource sensations. This helps us restore our nervous system back into balance. The first step to this is being able to actually name your resources. And then the second step is being able to track the sensations that happen. So a resource is a positive experience. It can include people and places, spiritual guides, activities, hobbies, animals. It can be, qualities about people, beliefs. For me, I like to have a memory that does not have any sort of emotional charge to it that's negative, right? Because a lot of our memories kind of have some complex positive and negative to it. I was in a band in Oregon, and I really like dark, overcast beaches and not a lot of people on the beaches and sweatshirts on the beaches. Those are my types of beaches. I burn easily. And so as the tide is going out, the tide is pulling out, and it's just leaving this pattern of ripples, right? This pattern of ripples being dragged out like dozens of feet towards the ocean. And I could sit there. I mean, really, I was standing there. I couldn't see anybody one side or the other. Very dark, the sun kind of coming through. You can hear a bird over here, the waves crashing over there. You've got this, the brown sand, the blue ocean, and then all the different layers of color in the sky. And I could put the arch of my foot on one of those kind of ripples of sand, and it felt like it held me, like the earth held me comfortably, like I was comfortably standing right there, comfortable and safe, right? And when I can remember it vividly. And when I think about that particular experience, and if you were to ask me questions about that particular experience, I could describe to you the taste on my lips from the salt. I could describe to you the colors, and I would get happy as I start to speak about it. Like I can really bring myself to that place. So naming a positive memory that you have, think about it, put yourself there. Who else was there? What colors do you see? What items do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste? Right? And as you kind of think about that and describe that, like, notice in your chest, does it feel more open? Do your shoulders feel more relaxed? Can you relax your jaw? Right? So this is an important thing to be able to access. So why is this important to access? Why do I encourage you to identify a resource? Why do I encourage you to downregulate? It's important to practice these techniques and experience what actually works, right? I don't teach anything that I haven't practiced myself. There's all sorts of things I could teach you. There's all sorts of things I've been taught. But I personally don't share anything that I haven't practiced myself, experienced myself, and have experienced that it works. And so if I pass that on to you and you practice it and you're equipped to pass it on to others, what we have is a shared experience and understanding of how to regulate ourselves and how to be our best available self, right? We cannot pour from an empty cup, right? You've heard that. The greatest metaphor, I think, to illustrate this is just that pre-flight checklist, right? The flight crew emphasizes to put on your own mask before helping others. And I think it's something that's easy to do when the masking is a concrete activity. Put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on others, right? It's more challenging to do when it's self-care, when it's prioritizing things that are often unseen, such as our mental health, such as our level of burnout, right? So we talked about purpose earlier. We introduced, like, okay, what is our purpose? What is it that causes us to do what we do? So in a few moments, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And when we return, we're going to talk about kind of your unique risk factors. We'll get into a couple specific practices that are really easy to implement. But over the break, I just would encourage you to kind of reflect on this quote. What if your purpose is to take impeccable care of yourself so that you have the energy and joy to serve others? Whew, kind of hits in the feels because we've got a long to-do list, right? You know, when you feel empty, take time to fill yourself and heal. When you are full, share it with the world. So go ahead and just kind of reflect on this quote. It's 4:43-ish. Let's see here. Let's return at 4:50. I'll give us time to stretch, reflect on our quote, reflect on our purpose. So we'll return at 4:50. All right. Can we see? Can we hear? Good. So let's tune in for a minute. We just had a little break. Let's think about, where are our bodies at? Is your body tense, feeling lazy, achy, low energy, in need of stillness, in need of activity? What are your emotions? Where are you at? Are you frustrated, feeling sad, angry, happy, optimistic? Just take a minute to reflect on where you're at. How has your thought process been today? This afternoon, is your mind racing? Are you feeling detached? Has it been challenging to focus? And then what about your behaviors lately? Are you feeling withdrawn, moving too quickly? Do you notice that you're kind of short fused, a little short tempered? So as you're kind of thinking where you're at right now or where you've been today, just know that none of these ways of adapting or being are necessarily bad or good, but when our functioning, when our reactions, when they cause us to miss out on the good in life, or to become a bad habit for us or a barrier to healthy relationships, then it's time to interrupt those patterns and to do something different. So again, just coming back to that neck and shoulder release, other techniques can be breathing to a count. So for example, we're going to breathe in for a count of 5, hold it, breathe out for a count of 5. So it would look like breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hold it. Breathe out 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? We can do a cleansing breath, really focusing on like a belly breath. One thing that's not illustrated up here, but that I like to emphasize, if you are feeling anxious or if you're dealing with somebody who's experiencing anxiety, one focus that I have found to be super helpful is to actually focus on breathing out. Because when we're in this position where we're really anxious and we're trying to get a deep breath, that causes us to become further anxious and can't get a deep breath, right? And really kind of starts to ratchet up that feeling of that sensation of anxiety and kind of things out of our control. But go ahead and give it a shot right now. If you just go ahead and breathe out all the way, just out, 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 out. Every single piece of oxygen in your lungs, get it out, 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 out. And then what you'll notice is once you get it all out, your body kind of does the work for you when you can get your brain out of the way, right? And your body will do that work for you. So just kind of a little cheat there. So I said, what if your purpose is to take impeccable care of yourself so that you have the energy and joy to serve others? And I just want to pause for anyone to weigh in or to kind of speak up in the chat. When that quote was presented to you, when you read that quote, what was your reaction to that? What are your thoughts about this quote? What does it bring up for you? Yeah, go ahead and keep them coming. I'm going to share a couple of really great pieces of feedback here. So Casey said it put words to what I stress about getting enough sleep so I can be my best. And then I've got April agreeing with it, but sometimes it feels like it's just not possible because of the responsibilities of life. And it's difficult to care for myself the way I care for others. A lot of us were taught that we shouldn't put ourselves first, right? That we shouldn't take time for ourselves. That's not a humble way of being, really. That we should continue to sacrifice for others, that we are designed to serve. So I think that there can be some real barriers there as well. You can bring the best for others if you're able to take care of yourself first. Yeah, so true. It's so true, but it's hard to do it, right? And so I know I'm not going to task you with some massive, revolutionary, life-changing practice. It really boils down to moments that are small enough that you can regulate your nervous system. And just building on those moments when you feel that you don't have the time, it can change everything in the way you enter a meeting, in the way that you enter a conversation, an encounter, right? It can be that take a deep breath to regulate, go ahead and practice one of these techniques before you respond to that email. So it's those kind of simple strategies that can really give you the space and the time to think, to feel, and then to react. So why are we concerned about you? Well, geez, risk factors here. We've got personal vulnerability factors, right? There's so many factors that can increase your likelihood of being negatively impacted by the work you do. You know, first of all, do you have your own history of trauma? Are you currently struggling with a difficult personal circumstance, right? Do we work with populations that share some of our own experiences, right? And that's kind of what's drawn us towards that work. Do you experience oppression? Do you have a history of mental illness or addiction? These issues can really contribute to increased vulnerability during high stress, trauma exposed work. And I think based on what we've seen kind of working with different school districts over the past year, that arguably that is what you are right in the middle of. Again, it's just very high stress, trauma exposed work, really, and dealing with meeting the needs of so many people all at once, every single day. So direct exposure, your own direct exposure to trauma, right? Was your wellness or property threatened? You know, what about recent community traumas and natural disasters? The thing that's really unique about our community is how impacted we've been by natural disasters, right? We've experienced lots of loss, some of us personally, or those that we know, lots of loss related to property, related to life. You know, you figure when we talk about triggers, we've been conditioned to the point where if it's really windy on a summer day, oftentimes anxiety starts to ratchet up, right? So we are oftentimes, you know, I talked about somebody in law enforcement going out to eat. Well, this is people in Napa County just living their lives, living in their homes, working day to day, is kind of dealing with these triggers and these conditions that can sometimes bring things up for us that we might not even really consciously realize front and center we are experiencing, you know. So secondary vicarious trauma, being exposed to indirect trauma in your work, right? And that's a reality that you face, again, working with folks with just different challenges. Compassion fatigue, experiencing a shift in your energy and motivation, feeling depleted in our ability to empathize for others, for, you know, our colleagues. Systems fatigue, right? This is experiencing just distress around failure of the system, you know, for the policies, the limitations, you know, the system feels like it's causing further harm, lack of resources, referrals, you know, these are just feelings of injustices that oftentimes, no matter what we do, it's like we still fall short, you know, or we can't get together to get certain things in place. And, you know, okay, great, this person finally is ready to receive help and there's nowhere to hand them off to. And that systems fatigue is very real. And then simply just burnout. So this can just result from a negative overall workplace experience, whatever that might be, you know, just, you know, the climate of the culture, you know, the hours you work, you know, lack of recognition, the quality of the relationships that you have with others. So a negative combination of these different factors can definitely lead to burnout, specifically secondary traumatic stress. So this is that emotional distress that results when you hear about the traumatic experiences of other individuals, right? And I think that you are positioned to hear from others, to see what others are going through. This can be like hearing about someone else's trauma story, seeing high levels of distress in the aftermath of traumatic events. So again, you think about, you know, coming into this school year, we are in a place of not just aftermath, but really still in it, right? So many people, I'm not even going to say just students, I think people in general have this sense of dysregulation and kind of challenge even socializing, kind of knowing like how to interact. And so that's a real thing, I think, that you guys are dealing with right now. So what are some of the symptoms here? You know, secondary traumatic stress, it could just be increased anxiety and concern, right? Intrusive thoughts, feeling powerless and helpless about others and about the volume of work to be done, you know, that there's so much need and not enough resource. And it can result eventually in this desire to really emotionally or physically withdraw from people and situations that trigger these thoughts and emotions. So how can schools acknowledge the secondary trauma? Well, I think that, you know, prioritizing conversations around social emotional learning and prioritizing conversations about trauma, and not just, you know, what we do for others, but how we care for each other and ourselves, really speaks to, you know, this being a priority for school leaders, considering ways to appreciate staff both publicly and privately, not just by recognizing great work, but really by acknowledging that the work is difficult, right? And then just this power of stepping away. And this is just such a great image, an illustration to remind us of, hey, when all else fails, just kind of take a step back here, right? And I want to show you kind of what that could look like, this power of stepping away, and if we're able to step away in a real timely fashion. So the stress response and action. So this is just an example of a stress response in the classroom, right? This could just as easily apply to anyone in any interaction. You know, you head home and you are talking with your partner after a bad day, you know, you are talking with your kids, anyone, a colleague. So, you know, stress reaction, stress response and action. So you are interacting with a student who didn't get rest due to their parents arguing last night. The student becomes agitated, complains, nobody is helping them, their voice begins to rise louder. So your emotional brain senses there's a potential threat to your physical or emotional well-being and kind of sets off these alarms. Your thinking brain really is going to check it out, and it's like, okay, well, there is a real threat here. So that thinking brain is going to go offline, and that emotional brain, that amygdala, right, that really like primitive fight, flight, or freeze brain takes over. Your emotional brain initiates that fight, flight, or freeze response, which is kind of that automatic reaction, right, that protects us. And then you react in that situation, perhaps by raising your voice, telling them that they need to calm down. At that point, your thinking brain can come back online, could potentially help you calm your own body down, right? So you can see this is a real example, right? I mean, any interaction that we have where we become short or curt or unable to really access our resilient zone, that's when our emotional brain can take over. So some other ways to respond to frustration: when we lose our cool and are snappy, withdrawn, and feeling disconnected, it doesn't feel good, right? It really does take practice to respond to frustrations in new ways. Kindness, softness, compassion, love, patience, and my favorite of all time, which is humor. But what we need to do is we need to allow our bodies to regulate so that we can access that thinking brain, right? So that we can access that best sense of self. So we can't fix everything. We will not fix everything, and I would not task you with such a task. So the goals of just brief trauma interventions, what does this look like? Resilience is the goal. Being resilient, you know, I mentioned that's that ability to kind of manage the ups and downs of everyday life with the skills and the tools that we have available to us. It's about not just surviving, but really thriving after difficult or challenging times. Being resilient is having an ability to bounce back after tragedy, after loss, right? And so the goal is to widen that resilient zone so people are better able to handle life stressors, to reset the nervous system, to bring it back into balance after stressful and traumatic events, to intercept the hijacking of that nervous system by learning skills for self-care. So as your thinking brain and your emotional brain are kind of having this battle of the brains, figuring out how do I respond, not how do I intercept that hijacking of my brain just automatically causing me to respond in ways that I can't take back. And then to integrate those skills into activities of daily living. This isn't just about coming together and practicing a practice and walking away. It's about, hey, these are simple enough strategies that I can go ahead and just implement this easily right here, right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Shoulder, shoulder, up, down, Toy Story, look, right? And just those simple little activities can help regulate us. So I don't know if anyone's ever seen this. I hadn't seen it for quite some time. And then I discovered it last year when we were just starting to talk about kind of responding and supporting teachers and administrators in the classrooms. And, you know, you may be familiar with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief model. And this is the stages of change curve, right? And if you look on the side axis here, it's morale and confidence. So this level of how, you know, motivated, you know, how positive and how confident I feel. And then we have this axis of time. So over time, right? So at the beginning, let's think about the pandemic. That was a shared experience, something that, you know, had trauma affixed to it that we all went through together. And if anyone's experience was even remotely like mine, it may have followed this curve in many ways. So at first, there's this kind of the surprise of the event. You know, there may have been people that thought we would be back in school in 2 weeks when this all goes away, right? And so maybe there was a reluctance to really put kind of permanent fixes in place. There was maybe a reluctance to respond, not really understanding, comprehending, or believing like how much things were going to shift or change. And so there may have been kind of this place of denial, right? And you just think about like, as this event happens, you know, perhaps we get to this place of frustration and depression, right? And oftentimes, you know, that low mood, that lack of energy, it's kind of this maybe a response to that battle of kind of fighting that shock and that denial and that frustration. But then we get to this place of experimentation where we get to try new things, right? We make a decision. So now we've got some stages of change stuff here. We've got some kind of pre-contemplation, contemplation. We're going to apply something. We're going to go ahead and give it a shot, practice it, make that decision, and then integrate it. So we have, you know, these changes integrated, you know, and again, I think you could probably come up with dozens of parallel processes in your personal and professional life over the past 2 years, just the past 2 years, really. About what this looks like, and it leaves us in a place with greater confidence, greater morale. And you think about this as that resilient zone. If I could overlay that on this particular chart, you could see how I'm kind of bounced out of my comfort zone, my resilient zone, but then I actually widen that resilient zone, right? So through that practice, that experimentation and decision and integration. So you've heard me use this term regulate, regulate, regulate. If you take nothing away from today, other than hopefully a good deep breath and some calm, this is the takeaway that I am most vested in you taking. You know, if you watch the National Geographic Channel and you see these two wildebeests and they're coming at each other and they lock their horns, right? They lock their horns and they're kind of like fighting, locking their horns, and it's like, dude, one of you's got to stop that. Like, one of you's got to just step away. You got to disconnect, you got to release. And so you'll find yourselves kind of like locked in this place with others, whether it's with a student, it could be with a staff, with a peer, with somebody you supervise, with a partner. When you find yourself locked here, just know that this is the time to regulate, relate, and reason. First, we need to listen to ourselves. Number one, we have to listen to ourselves. Am I regulated? And I mean, I think most of us go out throughout the world not regulated, right? And it could be something as simple as this. I would invite you to relax your jaw right now, because y'all are sitting there with these tensed up jaws, with these tensed up shoulders, and you don't even realize it. And I invite you to relax your jaw, relax your shoulders, and you didn't even realize how much we start to just kind of carry it up here. So we aren't as regulated and calm and available as we might think. So number one, listen to yourself. Are you regulated? And then number two, now I'm here to do this work. I've put my oxygen mask on. All right, I'm well enough to go ahead and engage with this person here who's clearly struggling. I've stepped back. All right. So I'm going to support the individual to feel physically and emotionally regulated. Number one. Number two, I establish relational control. And then three, I move towards reasoning. So often when we deal with somebody who is dysregulated, and again, think about those you encounter who are not students, right? Think about your peers, think about your family. You know, it's what we oftentimes will go straight to this place of reasoning, right? So I've got this person who's dysregulated, and I'm going to this place of reasoning. I'm going to try to use logic to show you the way, right? And I'm going to be really rational about it, really calm and rational about it. And I don't get anywhere, right? And even when we part ways, they're saying they're fine, but it's clear they're not. There's still a disconnect here, right? I'm going to just assume you're all nodding your heads, knowing this is not just my experience. So, you know, helping stressed individuals to feel calmer and in control of their bodies and able to think more clearly, this is going to assist with better outcomes, right? And again, of course, it first starts with you. So helping others regulate their bodies and their emotions, build safe relationships, it allows people's thinking brains, that rational place, to be active, right? So as a result, we're going to be able to benefit from the activities and interactions that we're trying to get to, right? So whatever your goal was in that. So how, you know, and again, please weigh in on the chat here. How do you help children, youth, others you work with? How do you help people regulate? Oftentimes, I mean, it's not talking. That's what it's not. It's not talking, right? It's actually some sort of actual physical interaction. Like how I said, just breathe out and then your body will breathe in for you instead of kind of trying to convince yourself to do it yourself. That can look like doing a push-up. It can look like pushing against the wall. It can look like having a backpack full of books on, and I'm going to actually be putting a little bit of weight on me and kind of grounding myself. My cousin, who's a teacher, she employed some strategies where she would have a kid who oftentimes would become dysregulated, and he would be the one who was helping her. It was kind of a senseless activity of moving books from this place to that place, right? And it was a grounding strategy for this kid, and it was calming for this kid. So that, you know, going for a walk, if somebody's feeling dysregulated or challenged, hey, why don't we go for a walk instead? We don't even need to talk at first. And then oftentimes, you know, it may be silent, but then that's when the conversation can start to happen. So just knowing that this place of, okay, hey, let's go ahead and downregulate here. And if we were all doing this together, I would get up, I would go and I would push on a wall and I would show you this, right? You push on a wall, I would invite you after we're done here to go ahead and do it. You push, 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 really grind your feet into the ground and you feel your entire body activated, okay? And then relate, right? Now's the time to go ahead and really demonstrate some empathy, some compassion, and then reason, right? And this formula is going to set you up for positive interactions and positive outcomes, outcomes that you're going to feel good about, a process that you're going to feel really good about. So I would encourage you to just remember these 3 R's: regulate, relate, and reason. Know that you don't need to fix all the problems. There's a great video on empathy, Brene Brown empathy, Google that. And, you know, really kind of talks about, like, it's fine to say, like, hey, I really don't know what to say. I just am so glad that you felt safe enough to tell me, right? That's all we need to say. People just need to feel heard, right? It can feel dismissive to say, like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It, in fact, may not be okay, right? And it's okay for us just to say, I'm here for you. I'm so sorry that you're dealing with this right now. I don't know what to say, but I'm so glad you felt comfortable telling me, right? So really emphasizing those things. This is a real hard one for us high achievers. This is a real hard one for us in education. Be okay with the least bad decision. So Chris Lehman is a journalist who wrote a piece on doing school in the time of coronavirus last year, right? And he said that least bad is simply a recognition that whatever we do right now is not the way we should do it under normal circumstances. And then what it becomes is perhaps just a Hippocratic oath to remind us that so much of what we're going to be doing is triage, right? So just use this standard of do no harm and do what you can. And then remember that first slide when we talked about social emotional learning. Maybe I don't have to get to this task today, but maybe what it's going to be is us actually just regulating our bodies today, because clearly everybody's all over the place. Clearly people are not in good emotional space. We don't have access to our best thinking brain. So really focusing on that. Keep in mind the following, that your friends, you, your family, students, colleagues are going to struggle. So using that universal precautions approach, you look at the person in front of you, assuming perhaps that there's some degree of struggle happening that you don't see, right? So a couple of easy strategies that we can employ as we are being okay with the least bad decision. Keep it simple. Decisions are hard. I can't make a decision on a menu. And I put these poor waiters in a position, the coffee guy over at Journeys just now, he's like, I don't know what you want, right? I made too many decisions today. Decisions are hard, just keep it simple, really, right? Feedback is more important than ever. So connection and feedback, or having that outlet, is so important. It's the difference between, you know, going to an empty court and shooting a basketball with no one working with you on your form, and then working with a coach who really helps you get better, right? So if the work is worth doing, then it's also worth getting high quality feedback. It's not easy, but I would really encourage you to also find ways and people within your field who you're comfortable to give and get feedback from as well. You know, how do you debrief as a team? Does your team debrief, right? How do you debrief from your day? So having partners in that, knowing what is the why, relevancy and connecting those dots matters a lot, right? For anyone who's an administrator or anyone who's a supervisor, knowing that when people see the why in the things that we ask of them, it increases the motivation, it generates the buy-in. And oftentimes we have a lot of things that we need to roll out, that we have to implement. It's worth it to take the extra time to really connect those dots and explain the why, because people can generally get behind something that makes sense and that is related to the work that they do. And again, all of these principles are transferable, not just in us colleague to colleague, but in you teacher to student, right? Staff to supervisor, whatever that might look like, parent to kid. So in law enforcement, we talk about this concept of verbal judo, right? And we talk about these kind of 5 universal truths. And again, knowing that you don't need to fix everything, you can't fix everything. We can be okay with the least bad decision. We're putting our oxygen mask on first, and then we're going to accept these things here. All people want to be treated with dignity and respect. Yeah, I get that. All people want to be asked rather than told to do something. It could have the same outcome. It's just a small shift, right? That's that trauma-informed care, that trauma-informed paradigm shift, to be asked rather than told. All people want to be told why they're being asked to do something. Again, know that why, share that why. All people want to be offered options rather than threats. Absolutely, right? Options also give us a way out, a way to save face, right? I have done lots of different work in, with kids in crisis, adults in crisis, and creating space, removing the audience when there's a crisis, and then providing an outlet, a way out where they can save face is such an important piece here, right? So we're not in the business of shaming anyone. Let's provide ways out. And then all people want to be given a second chance. If we can accept these truths and remind us of these truths each day, it might make it easier for us to continue to provide grace to others, which is great. But then there's the self-compassion piece, right? With our own high expectations of ourselves. So if I wouldn't say it to a friend, I shouldn't say it to myself, period. And I don't think that we probably do a super great job about this. So this term, right, it simply means being kind and understanding to yourself when you're confronted with your own personal failings. And it's just accepting your humanness, knowing that things are not always going to go the way that you want or how you plan them, and just opening up your mind and heart to that and being okay with it, right? If you are a little critical, this might sound like some kind of fluffy talk, but there's a lot of science behind this. There's a lot of research that shows those with self-compassion actually have lower levels of stress, that they actually have improved well-being, less life dissatisfaction, right? And actually more healthy behaviors. And this is a journey, not a destination, in my opinion, right? but it's something to constantly remind ourselves of. You know, I know if I'm talking to Guadalupe and if she says something negative about herself, I can easily tell her, like, why would you talk about like my favorite program assistant like that? And it kind of shifts things and changes things. And so just remembering that it's like, hey, each of us is important and relative to other people. Let's treat ourselves with kindness. I talked about earlier, like the difference between I have to be and I get to be today, right? So having gratitude in the workplace, you know, maintaining a gratitude journal, not even something that you have to keep writing, but simply just a list of things, right? And it's not just like, oh, good food. I'm talking delicious Havarti dill cheese. I'm grateful for that. It's delicious, right? Like tomatoes, you know, like the heirloom tomatoes from the farmer's market with just a tiny bit of salt on them. I am super grateful for that. It's all about food, right? But there's all these other things that I'm grateful for. And it's not just like my family or like, it's really, I can really hone down on really small things that I'm grateful for. And it can shift my experience and it can shift your experience with me. And so practicing gratitude, this is a strategy to give thanks, right? How did that get in there? Okay, so we're going to transition real quickly here. We're getting close to wrapping it up, but I want you to be, and also we're in that 11th hour here. So if you're able to, I would really invite you to stand up. This is one of those kind of grounding that regulate activities. Guadalupe knows what's coming, so she's turning her camera off here. So what I would invite you to do is to actually just kind of stand comfortably with your feet kind of just hip width apart. And then what we're going to do is do not forget to breathe, but you're going to start to tense up your body and hold it. You're going to maintain it. So you're going to start with your toes. You're going to squeeze your toes, tense your toes, your feet, your calves, your quads, your glutes, right? So squeeze your butt, squeeze your stomach, squeeze your arms and your neck. Again, don't forget to breathe and hold it, hold it. Your stomach, your butt, your back, your neck. It's not pretty, but you hold it and you squeeze and you squeeze and you squeeze and you squeeze. And then you relax. Take a breath. And that's it. That's it. And you notice how you just brought a little bit of oxygen into your brain. You might be feeling a little bit more awake, a little more alert. You might have giggled a little bit, whatever it is. It's all good though, right? So this is I could have you do this a couple times in succession and your body would actually feel a little tired. So if you're looking for a way to relax and regroup, Jill, absolutely, it counts as exercise. I took off my smartwatch so I don't get to count those calories though. So yeah, you know, your heart rate kind of rises, but then you're present, right? So this is a really easy way to kind of practice that grounding. This is something you can do in between periods. This can be something you do in your car before you walk in, right? In your car before you walk into your home, right? A chance to kind of regroup, bring your body into presence, be mindful, and enter into a space, again, with that best self and that thinking brain. So active listening, I could do a whole series on communication, would love to at some point, but this is just a way of listening and responding to others, improving mutual understanding. So there's some actual strategies here, like what that looks like, right? Paying attention, withholding judgment, our body language, being really aware of our body language, you know, restating questions. You know, body language, one thing that when I was a new supervisor, I remember I would sit down at the computer and I would have my staff in front of me and I'd be like, at the computer, I'd be like, all right, go. And I'm like solving problems, like just crazy solving problems over here. And it's like, hold on a minute, solving problems. And it took me a minute before I realized I'm not developing relationship. And I had to change my body language and my whole way of thinking, right? Fortunately, I caught that pretty early on in my career. Still easy to slip into this place of really kind of listening to respond, right? The second that you actually start talking, I've already assessed your entire argument and I have my defense planned. So being caught, like really conscious of when I'm listening to respond versus when I'm really listening to hear. That's really critical. So next steps, we're going to provide you with a wellness plan. I would encourage you to be intentional about self-care. It's not something that is going to do itself. You have to be really intentional about it. You know, earlier we talked about, you know, are you getting enough sleep, getting better sleep? What do we need to do, right, in order to relax and to recharge our batteries? So you'll have an opportunity to kind of work through that plan. There's a lot of content on this next one. You'll have time to break it down later on, but this really talks about kind of those differences between burnout, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, and actually, you know, kind of explain like what are the differences here, and then what are the solutions, what are the remedies. So you'll be able to study that on your slides. So some of the things that we, you know, again, just as we're summarizing here, practical strategies as we understand trauma, as we understand how to create trauma-informed spaces. You know, being present and emotionally available. We've learned how to kind of regulate in order to do that. Asking people directly how you can help them. How can I be helpful to you? Is a great fallback term. Watching for triggers, even small ones, and responding proactively. You know, if somebody says I'm fine and they're clearly not fine, it might be a good time to put the pen down and just go ahead and actually focus your attention on regulation. Regulate first, and then we can go ahead and figure the rest out, right? Shifting from judgment to curiosity. So instead of, you know, like what's happened to you, for example, kind of makes us more patient with others. Provides structure and predictability. This is really important. People are kind of pushing to know where they can go, but having some predictability and structure lets us kind of know where those limitations are and brings us safety. Promoting restorative practices. So again, what we're talking about, being in our homes, in the workplace, ourselves, be aware of that vicarious trauma that starts to really kind of build up on itself and those weights that we carry for others. And then be a helper, not a savior, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first. Make sure your cup is full. So that self-care plan worksheet is going to give you an opportunity to kind of look through and see what it is you're doing now, and then to identify some things that you can do moving forward. I would encourage you to take the time to actually reflect on this and to use that as a guide to continuously reorient yourself to that plan, and then to continuously reorient yourself to your purpose, right? If you haven't identified yet, okay, well, what is my purpose? Take the time, maybe this next weekend, take the time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it takes, to identify your purpose, to identify what it is that motivates you to do this work, to write it down on a sticky note, to put it somewhere that you can go ahead and see every day, whether it's on the visor of in your car or on a mirror, something that you can remind yourself, okay, that's what I'm here for. Take a breath, right? And then go into that next space. So identify one or more things, just kind of thinking back on all of this. You know, we gave you a handful of different strategies, just ways of thinking, ways of being, and weigh in either through sharing or in the chat. One or more things that you can do immediately, just really simply, to more fully support resilience and healing, either in the community, in your agency, in your home, or within yourself. So I'm just going to give that a couple seconds here. One simple thing you can commit to, for the greater good. And see, when we take the time to think about it and name it and say it out loud, it becomes more real for us, right? It's not this thing that's abstract. So April is committing to taking a deep breath before responding. Jill's going to develop more self-compassion. You guys are taking notes, right? We're holding everyone accountable to these things. No, I'm kidding. No, it really is for us, and in our, you know, how real is it for us? Because we can walk away from this and implement no changes and not work on our own self-care and not connect things to our why. But we'll be missing out. We'll be missing out on the best that life has to offer and our best self. So just leaving you with these, you know, fantastic quotes by Maya Angelou. I've learned people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. and then, challenging each of you to live this out. That quality of strength lined with tenderness is an unbeatable combination, right? So Guadalupe will be sending out, as I shared, a couple resources. She'll share these slides with you, and you'll have my contact information. And yes, just want to thank you all for joining today and hope you found some value in this. We do have a survey. It's in the chat, but Guadalupe will also send it out by email, and just would ask that you take a couple minutes to give us some feedback. Looking forward to doing something with you all in person one day. I bring chocolate, Play-Doh's involved, so we'll look forward to that in the future.
Julie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all of the things that you shared. It looks like everyone in the chat is seconding that. So I can't give you like a room full of applause, but thank you so much.
You are welcome. Take good care, everyone.
You too. Thank you, Guadalupe.
Of course, thank you.
Bye, everybody.